I think people get a little carried away when they talk about those wealth effects, though. You know, certainly it has some effect on spending, but if you went around and asked people, you know, how much did your stock portfolio go up last month, and did that impact how much you went out and spent? You know, most people aren't that attached to what's going on in their stocks and how much they're spending right now. And so it does have a factor in terms of how much you're saving, and that's sort of at the margin. At the end of the day, what drives your spending are your wages. And the biggest thing that's going to drive spending is the employment markets. And so if you look at the turning points in the employment market, you look at what's going on, that's what's going to drive the trend in the economy. And I think we've seen such a rapid decrease in the rate of job losses in Canada and the United States, you know, that you're getting, again, this sort of nearer term rebound. But I think people tend to overestimate the wealth effects just because the numbers are so dramatic when you talk about $14 trillion worth of lost wealth in the US. But at the end of the day, 80–90% of your spending is still driven by your wages that you get every 2 weeks in your job. And so I think people sort of went for the sexy story and forgot about the fundamentals a little bit. So that's in there, and there's still a fair bout of uncertainty. I mean, I'm not saying this is going to be absolutely correct, but it seems to be where the data is pointing at this point in terms of the turning there. You know, there's still areas of concern. When you look in the US, commercial real estate is probably going to continue to contract for at least another year, but that's a minuscule part of the US economy, and it always lags. Because the first thing you build are the homes, and the second thing you build are the shopping centers to support the homes. So it works the same way as the recession starts to entail. The first thing that starts to move again is the home construction. The last thing to move is all the support infrastructure for those homes. So I think it's just sort of working out those lags and figuring out what's going on in terms of where those differences are. And then the other big one will just be the external side. I think the fact that we sort of are looking externally and seeing all this growth around the world, that's giving an extra boost to Canadian exports and trade, which is something that we weren't really expecting, and nearly the strength that we're getting. So I think that's another area where I think we're seeing a lot more strength than we were expecting. And I think strength where some areas other shops might not have been necessarily looking at it at this point. Okay. Oh, I guess we'll take one more and then we'll finish up here. Yeah. Okay.
Just quickly, when you talk about the job loss not being as great or job growth expected, do the banks look at the types of jobs that are being created? You know, like we're going to be moving more into contract type positions, lower wages than we've seen. So how does that factor into your projections?
You know, I think you're certainly seeing, you know, you've had this long-run structural shift between manufacturing and services, and you know, you're still seeing a bit of that going through. You know, the one interesting thing that always, that's sort of the long-run debate, and we'll get to your little short run. I think that's one of the fascinating ones is, regardless of where you are, whether you're in the US, whether you're in Canada, whether you're in Europe, you get these questions of, you know, we're losing the manufacturing sector jobs, and we're creating jobs that don't make anything. So how can our economy possibly grow? And you know, we're losing all these jobs because China's underpricing us, and you know, Malaysia's underpricing us. The funny thing is, if you pick up a business newspaper in India, they complain about how they're losing all their manufacturing sector jobs to Malaysia. So I'm convinced that if you follow the chain, there's a wonderful Caribbean island somewhere that's taking all of the jobs. But everyone has the same excuses, and it just can't possibly be true. The fact is, when you look at Canada, you look at the manufacturing sector, as a percent of GDP, Canada produces just as much manufacturing output now as it did about 30 years ago. The same in the US, the same in Europe. We make the same amount of stuff. The issue is it just takes less people, because we have a lot more machinery and equipment, we have a lot more education, we have a lot more technology, and that's really the factor. It just takes less people to make the manufacturing side, but you're still seeing the same amount of output. You're still seeing that go through. That said, you know, the debate in the auto sector has been there for some time now in terms of the restructuring, you know, that would have to happen at some point, and the issues that were going on there, and a lot of the legacy costs that were holding down some of the big three. You know, that's certainly going through, and it certainly means, I think the difference in this recession, maybe necessarily to other ones, is you saw massive industries very localized. You know, when you look at Windsor right now, the unemployment rate's about 15–16% and continuing to rise. You know, when you look at the London area, when you look in Guelph and the area here, you know, the auto sector has definitely taken a massive hit. And so that means you have a very localized job loss. That does become very hard, because how does a city, you know, if you're the Chamber of Commerce, how do you sort of keep the local economy going when such a large percentage of the jobs that are in that area are now all going through the same problem at the same time? And I think the answer to that is that's where the government has the role. That's where you get the coordinated action to try and move into those areas to help that sort of sector, to help to readjust. But there's not a lot anyone can do to create new demand for the sorts of products. The issue is the demand is given by the world, and you sort of have to restructure the businesses to account for it. So there's going to have to be a lot more effort over the next 2 years to help for that restructuring, to retraining in the businesses and go through. And it's a very localized issue that certainly hurts areas, when you're looking in the Gulf region in terms of that restructuring. But we will restructure, we will move through it, and we've been moving out of manufacturing jobs for the last 30 years. Even before we got into this recession, I think the last time the UK actually saw job growth in the manufacturing sector was the early 90s. Every quarter since then, they've lost manufacturing jobs. So it creates a different economy. It tends to create a more stable economy until we got into this debacle. But we'll continue to see that sort of trend play out as we move forward. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the membership of the Chamber of Commerce, I want to present Rich with a small token of our appreciation.